Hi folks, Six Ices here. Now tell me, what does a Barlow look like? All of the knives here, I think, would generally be considered a Barlow, but they're all quite different from, you know, some of these, this Taylor's slimline Barlow, there's a Stephen Cocker slimline Barlow, another Taylor slimline, through to, you know, the big chunky boys like this big Stag Barlow, again from Taylor's. Perhaps, you know, we might traditionally think of an American Barlow, that's a buck, or this one here from Case, another one from Case here. These are all the sorts of knives you might think of as a Barlow, but there are many different shapes and styles. All we really know about the Barlow is it was invented around 1670 by a guy called Obadiah Barlow, who was a Sheffield knife maker, and there is some record of it being a knife with a stronger bolster, a longer bolster, and that's really, as far as the descriptions go from the day, I think it's come to mean a knife with a sort of teardrop shaped handle, and I suppose the Case Barlow becomes the quintessential Barlow, a bit like the way the Sodbuster becomes what Case defined the Sodbuster to be in 1967. It's kind of they haven't trademarked the word Barlow, thank God, but you know, if they had, that's what we would probably expect to see as a Barlow. But even amongst Sheffield knife makers, so right now if I take out these foreign interlopers from here, but even amongst the Sheffield Barlow makers, these are all knives that Sheffield makers would call a Barlow. And even if you just go to one maker, and I'm going to here pick out Stephen Cocker, so we take out all of these other ones, but if we just look at Stephen Cocker, these are two Barlows that I've had from him in the past. Now, one has the long bolster, they both have the clip point blade, which isn't essential of a Barlow, but it's, you know, one of the things which is often common in Barlows. They do sort of have a teardroppy shape, but really all that makes them Barlows is the fact that Stephen Cocker, the guy that made them, calls them a Barlow, and this is effectively a standard Barlow, although it's a nice one in Stag with a very high polish and brass liners, and it's very nice. And this one is his slim Barlow with his scalloped bolster, which is really smart. But this one doesn't really have a long bolster, and neither of them are desperately teardrop shaped. In fact, I always think this is more like a trapper shaped handle. But he also does another Barlow, and that's the subject of this particular video, and that's this one. This is what he calls the Stannington Barlow, which was a style popular in an area around Sheffield called Stannington. It has, of course, the long bolster, and I think this one is reminiscent of some of the knives we see these days coming out of Lion Steel, the Lion Steel Roundhead. This is a traditional pinned knife, unlike the Roundhead, which is a sort of screwed and riveted knife. This is very traditional, it's very pinned, it's pinned rather than riveted or anything else. It has proper dished liners. It's a very traditional knife. We've got rosewood covers, saw cut, and the only other saw cut Barlow I have actually is the Delrin one, which, you know, I think it's moulded that way, but that's an American made buck. Anyway, so he made this one. He made them for an event that was happening in Stannington in Sheffield a couple of weeks ago, and I got this as a sort of as one of that run that he made for them. So I say saw cut, rough cut, rosewood bolsters, pinned, and sort of rough finish. Now that's a deliberate finish. you know, he's quite obviously very capable of producing a very smartly finished knife. This is done deliberately to capture that particular style of Barlow. Equally, it doesn't have the nice polished blade. We've got a satin finish here. We do have a long pull, which is slightly different to the stamped pull. I think this is probably cut rather than stamped, but don't quote me on that. That may be wrong. The one thing I perhaps don't really like about this knife is the fact that it's laser etched with the word Stannington Barlow, and then on the tang of the knife it says Stephen Cocker Handmade Sheffield Knives. Now, I do like the fact that it's Stephen Cocker Handmade Sheffield Knife. I just don't really like the laser etching. I would prefer to see these knives with a stamped tang stamp, but I sort of understand, you know, more like that, but I kind of understand why they're not. I think, you know, you have to have dies made to stamp those things in, and I think Stephen is a small time maker, and I like his knives all the more for that. So I sort of understand why he does the laser etching, but it's not my favourite part of this. But anyway, it's laser etched onto a nickel silver bolster. I believe it's a carbon steel blade, but it's probably C70 or something like that. I don't know what it is. It doesn't really matter. This is a really nice rustic working man's knife, and I suspect that if you were to have looked at the sorts of knives that Mark Twain was looking at for Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn, this is most like the sort of thing he had in mind. I don't imagine for a second he meant something all posh and shiny like these, certainly not mother of pearl. I think this is more rough cut wood slabs, pinned, and even the pins are, you know, they're hammered down, but they're not so neatly finished off and rounded and polished like you might get on one of Stephen's more higher end knives. On the other hand, even these now handmade by Stephen are relatively cheap. I think he's selling them for about £50, whereas you would pay considerably more for something like this, and very much more for something with this sort of scalloped bolsters and stag and so forth like that. But I say, a nice knife. You've got well made, well put together, no gaps or anything. I wrote a thing on Facebook today about gapping. Somebody was talking about a particular knife that they'd seen that had a, I'm trying to see if I've got, none of these have got any, none of the knives I've got here have got any gaps, but there was some gapping, no, none of these, between the springs and the liners on the back of a knife. I mean, you could almost say there's a gap. I'll take this as an example. I don't think it's the sort of thing you get head up about, but just above my thumb there, between that left-hand bolster and the spring, you could call it a hint of a gap. Now, I don't think that is a gap. The reason for it is that in a traditionally made knife, you take the brass liner and you, what they call, dish the liner. That's to say, you put a die in the middle of the blade, and you stamp it so that it's, rather than being a flat piece of brass, it becomes a domed or dished piece of brass. Then you fit it to the scales and the bolster with the dome facing into the blade, but it means that the edges of the brass press against the stag or wood or whatever is in the handle, makes an airtight seal all the way around the edges, so you get no moisture or debris between the blade, between the liner and the scale material. But because water or debris in there would cause damage, But if that then creates a slight gap between the liner and the spring, and you know, you could maybe argue there's some sort of around where my thumb is there, but you know, I don't think so. That bit you can clean and you can oil, but you don't want to have to clean or oil between the scale and the liner. And that's the way traditional knives are made. And it does mean that you are likely to get some small gap between the spring and the liners, but it's not a fault. That's the way traditional artisan made knives are made. And if, you know, okay, if there's a great gaping great void in there that you could fall inside, that would be a fault. But if it's not 100% perfect, then that's fine. Why we have become obsessed with this is because you have companies that make knives like Rough Rider, Case, and GEC for that matter. They cut out all their parts completely flat. Traditionally, the liners on a Sheffield knife are cut out with tin snips out of brass. Sometimes they're cut in a fly press, but whatever, they tend not to be desperately flat, and therefore they're dished in order to make them sealed. Whereas companies these are really, I mean, these are hand finished. Both Rough Rider and Case and GEC, they're all hand finished, machine made knives. Even GEC cut out their parts using water jets, and then they grind their blades in CNC grinding machines. They're not really traditional knives at all. They're kind of mock traditionals, and then they're riveted. As you see, this is a rivet rather than a pin. That's a rivet rather than a pin. The Rough Rider here is actually completely pinned, which is, you know, better than you'll get from a GEC. But there we are. They make all the pieces flat, and that's the same way that the Jack Wolf and J Made and Lion Steel and all that, they make all the pieces are all completely flat. So when they fit them all together, there's no way you're going to have any, no way you should have any gaps between them. And that's why they all come out pretty good. Funnily enough, between the bone there and the brass, just at the bottom of the bolster, there is a slight bit of gapping where it does matter on this, and that's the problem with having these machine-made knives. They're not in the true traditional style. But well, there we are. I mean, I put, to me, I don't think there's any difference between a Rough Rider and a GEC. The fact that one's made in America and one's made in China, it's largely irrelevant. They're both mostly made by machine and then hand finished. Same with Case. I think Case are even more machine made than any nowadays. You know, they're not polished by hand or anything. They're all tumble polished, same as GEC. But you know, there we are. You get what you get. This is a true traditional artisan made knife, made in a workshop by a man with his hands from beginning to end. Obviously he uses powered grinders and machines, but then, you know, powered wheels have been used in knife manufacturers since certainly since the 1600s and probably before that. I mean, okay, originally water powered and then steam powered and now electric powered, but nonetheless, most of the work is done by hand. These are made by a man holding bits of steel against a wheel and using his eye to judge when they're ready. Not a CNC machine in sight, not a water jet cutter in sight. So anyway, he's made a very nice knife here. His packaging is an improvement too. It's not amazing, but it comes in a nice little box with Stephen Cocker's Handmade Sheffield knives on the front, a bit of tissue inside there, just the same as the stamp on his blade, whereas, you know, Arthurite still just come in a plastic bag. They don't make any attempt at smartening themselves up, but that's fine. That's what they are. Anyway, I think that's probably enough rambling. I've rambled far too much on this. It's way late at night when I'm doing this. So there we are, Stannington Barlow by Stephen Cocker. Really, really nice little knife. Very nice to carry, very nice to use. Sharp, nice action, a decent snap on it, decent bit of walk and talk. There we are. If you like the stuff, please give it a thumbs up, and if you want to hear more of it, please subscribe, and there will be some more at some point. I will actually, I should probably say, there will be a series of knives coming up. There's about 10 Shirogorov and a similar number of Cherbakov, some Medford knives, and a nice Rockstead actually coming up as well. They'll all be coming up on this channel over the next few months. Hopefully I will have time to do the recordings and then feed them out over time. But I've got a friend in Edinburgh who's offered to loan these knives to me, so we'll be starting that hopefully next week. Thank you very much. See you soon. Bye.